Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the MOFGA Federal Actions Briefing. We're just about to get started here. We're going to go through a few housekeeping items. We're just letting people in from the waiting room right now as we're getting started. So again, thanks for joining us today, and we're looking forward to diving in with each of you. I will go ahead and do a couple housekeeping notes while we're letting people into the room, which is that we're really excited to have you all join us today. We would love to have you use the chat function to share your name and where you're from, so we can get a sense of who is on the call with us today. And then we would really appreciate it if everybody could keep themselves on mute so we can minimize any background noise. And the presentation is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards on our website, but we want everybody to be aware that it is being recorded. And then we're going to have time for questions and answer with our speakers towards the second half of our presentation today, and you are welcome to use the chat function to ask those questions. You can put your questions in the chat at any time, but we will have a specific Q&A section towards the second half of our presentation today. We want to make sure we can answer everybody's questions. And we also will be sharing out some links. So for the first part of our presentation today, we'll have a brief slideshow to walk through some of the high-level impacts, and then we'll be hearing from our farmer participants that are on the call with us today. And throughout, we will be referencing a few resources and items, but we're going to save all of those links and put them in the chat towards the end of our presentation, so everybody can have access to those and make sure that you can click through to the particular resources that we're talking about. So welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started today. So thank you for joining us for the MOFGA briefing on the federal funding situation and what's going on at the USDA. Today, we have 3 speakers that are going to be sharing and then sharing out time for questions and answer from all of you. I'm Sarah Alexander. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and I'm really honored today to be joined by Seth Kroeck from Crystal Spring Farm and Annie Watson from Sheepscot Valley Farm. And both of our speakers today happen to also be MOFGA board members. So we're really appreciative for all they do as farmers and also MOFGA board members and leaders within our broader community. So thank you, Annie and Seth, for joining us today, and we'll have you introduce yourselves as well when you start sharing your information that you're going to be sharing today. So I'm going to do a quick overview of what is going on. And I will say this is an evolving situation that is moving in real time. We're finding out more information seemingly every minute, and including new information that we've gotten today that I'll be sharing. But what's been happening really over the last 2 months is a series of actions that have been harming and impacting our farmers and also our service providers that are providing access to support and helping farmers navigate the situation that we're in. So those things specifically include direct farmer payment freezes. So we've seen since January 20th a number of programs where farmers have had contracts that have been slated for reimbursement, that have been frozen, and then unfrozen. That is a continuing cycle that we're seeing. And just this week, the most recent round of unfreezing happened with the REAP contracts, the Rural Energy for America program. And these freezes and unfreezes have been both stressful and confusing for farmers. The most recent thing that came this week came with additional guidance that USDA was changing the program and that producers would have an opportunity to change their applications that had already been approved. And so that created additional confusion about whether that was a requirement or something that had to happen in order for those contracts to move forward. So we're getting that information in real time. We're working with our congressional offices and we're trying to share out that guidance and that information. But this still is an ongoing situation with the farmer, the farmer payments and farmers navigating that to ensure that they can get the money that they are expecting through contracts that have already been signed, and in many cases for work that has already been done, which these are really just reimbursement payments. We're also seeing canceled programs, and we're going to get a little bit more specifically into that. But the really big ones here in Maine that we've seen are the local food procurement programs for the local food purchasing assistance and the local food for schools program. And that also has a direct impact on farmers because farmers have those contracts. That food that was being purchased for those programs is coming from our local farmers directly. We're seeing application freezes. This is looking like two things. One, applications that farmers have already put in are being held up and just not being approved or not being obligated for funding. And then we're also seeing applications and processes that the USDA would normally be putting out requests for proposals, either being removed from USDA websites or canceled entirely. We've seen USDA staffing cuts, and it's hard to get a handle on what the actual numbers are. But we know here in the state of Maine, about 20% of the state's NRCS staff has been cut so far, and that USDA offices have been required to submit further plans for how to reduce their workforce. We're now layering in the impacts of tariffs, both the ones that have already taken effect and the ones that have yet to take effect but are supposed to take effect next week, increasing prices and creating uncertainty. And we're also seeing farmer service providers have our programs frozen. So groups like MOFGA, Maine Farmland Trust, Full Plates, Full Potential, Cultivating Community, Somali Bantu Community Association, CEI, CDI. There are over a dozen nonprofit service providers in the state of Maine, in addition to Cooperative Extension and University of Maine, and our Department of Agriculture, who all have programs that are funded and coordinated through the USDA. And many of those programs have been frozen or canceled or at risk of being so. So I want to share just a little bit of context for anybody who's not aware of just what is this all about? What does the USDA do? Where does this money come from? Why is this important? And why do we need to take action around this? So USDA nationally is known as the People's Department. USDA has 29 agencies that support every aspect of our food system in our rural communities. Nearly every farm in the US participates or benefits from USDA programs, and these are everything from loans for actually purchasing your farm, for operating, for equipment, grants for making infrastructure improvements, conservation practices, production practices, research, all the way up through direct food procurement from farmers. So there is a very broad swath of programs that support farmers and our farming economy and help ensure that everybody can be successful. USDA also runs the nutrition safety net programs. So this is SNAP and other food assistance programs for the food security system. USDA helps all rural communities access electricity, water, broadband, and other services and infrastructure. So the state of Maine, which is highly rural, benefits greatly from many USDA programs through USDA Rural Development. When we talk specifically about USDA and how it gets its funding and who gets to make decisions about what's happening at USDA, Congress approves and appropriates the funds for USDA. And many programs are passed through the Farm Bill, which happens every 5 years, or at least it's supposed to happen every 5 years. The 2023 Farm Bill, which is the last one or the most recent one that is supposed to have been passed, has been delayed for the last 2 years and is currently pending in Congress and uncertain whether or not we actually will pass a new Farm Bill. So what has happened is that the money and the programs from the 2018 Farm Bill, which was the last Farm Bill, have carried forward through continuing resolutions for the last couple of years. And we could do a whole session just on the Farm Bill and all the programs and the funding and how it works. We don't have time for that today, but there are different types of funding that come through the Farm Bill, both mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory funding that comes through Congress has to be paid no matter what the cost is, and that cost may fluctuate. Discretionary programs are what are funded through the appropriations process that Congress goes through. In whatever time frame Congress chooses to do those appropriations processes. And this graphic is a little blurry, but we're going to share the direct source in the chat later in the links. This is just an overview of the 2018 Farm Bill to get a sense of the total programs, what the total of what we're looking at and impacts are. So over 76% of what goes through the Farm Bill are for nutrition programs. So again, that's for supplemental nutrition assistance and those direct nutrition programs. The rest of the Farm Bill, the other 24% of the Farm Bill, go towards various farm support programs. The bulk of that is going towards commodity programs and towards crop insurance. But conservation, you'll see on here, is an important chunk. And then we have this other 1%. And almost everything other than the direct, NRCS conservation programs that we're talking about today, almost most of the other programs that we're talking about really come through this other very small percentage of funding that has a huge impact for our farms here in Maine, but is a very small percent of overall funding at the federal level. So just want to give an example of NRCS impacts in Maine. So this is the Natural Resources Conservation Services. This helps with various conservation practices and has been around for decades. You can see here the most recent historical trends of investments that have been made into farms directly. This is funding that goes directly to farms for on-farm conservation practices to help with production and conservation on the farm. And so in 2024, you can see that 28 million was obligated to farmers in the state of Maine to adopt conservation practices on their farms. And we're going to share out the link to where you all can go get this information yourself if you'd like to play around with this. But the reason we had such a huge jump in conservation funding in the state of Maine in 2024 is because Congress passed a few years ago something called the Inflation Reduction Act. And this was a big bipartisan bill that passed that included a lot more funding for conservation practices to both help farms and to also help address and mitigate climate change more broadly, recognizing, something that we have known for a very long time, and that we talk about, that building soil health helps with everything. It helps with better production, it helps with healthy ecosystems, and it helps sequester carbon and mitigate climate change. But at the very root of all of this, and the reason this funding is going directly to farms, is that it helps the farms. It helps the farms have better production practices and more success and farm viability. So the IRA funding almost doubled the amount of NRCS money that's going directly to farms in Maine. This is the 2024 data of money that came through a program called EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. The USDA programs are a whole host of acronyms, and I apologize in advance for getting into those. But this chart here shows you that EQIP funding that came through the Farm Bill, so this was the mandated appropriated funds by Congress through the Farm Bill in 2024, was $13 million. And funds that were appropriated and mandated through the IRA program, same program, EQIP, but the funds were just coming from a different source, was 12 million. So it nearly doubled the amount of money that could go into conservation practices on farms. Now, this is the funding that has been hotly debated under the current administration. And the administration is now currently sitting on these funds and not obligating them. And we can see from this chart here, this is so what has happened in 2025 fiscal year so far. This chart looks a little strange because only 96,000 has been obligated through the EQIP Farm Bill fund so far. So the amount there didn't kind of add up to the millions that were in the other charts. But $0 have come through EQIP IRA so far. And what we've just learned today is that the USDA, even though they have said that IRA funds are unfrozen and that the contracts are going to move forward for IRA EQIP funds, we are finding out through work with our congressional offices and our producers that in fact they are still holding up those funds and are not obligating them and are not getting them out to producers who have had pre-approved contracts. So the loss of what this could mean in Maine, just to go back and remind ourselves, is likely about another $12 million that could have come or more that could have come from IRA funding, from EQIP, that could have gone directly to farmers and producers this year, some of which farmers have already applied for, have already been pre-approved for, have thought their projects are in the works, and now are finding out that that money is being sat on and not obligated and not getting out. So the USDA programs that are at risk or have been frozen or cut currently. So again, that IRA EQIP conservation practices, that money is not getting out to producers. The REAP project has been frozen and now modified, and there will not be a REAP process for this year. So that will be something that hopefully will be recovered in the future, but that potentially could be lost funding for projects that have made a big difference on farms in terms of energy and energy production and resilience. The local food purchase assistance and local food for schools program has been cut in the state. That was $4 million that was obligated to go to the state programs in Maine that would be purchasing food directly from farmers and getting them to our schools and our food banks. The TFAP funding in Maine, which is the emergency food assistance, has been cut by 50%. And Good Shepherd Food Bank just shared on a call I was on with them yesterday that their shipments of monthly food, which were at 500,000 pounds a month, have gone down to 250,000 pounds a month. So they're receiving less food at the same time funding is being cut from other programs that are also procuring food. And the Farm to School program was officially cut this week in terms of it will not have an application this year. There will not be an opportunity for folks to get funding for that Farm to School program. Now, I just want to share a little bit about MOFGA. First and foremost, we definitely are working hard to get our producers every dollar that they're owed and make sure that these programs are flowing for our producers. But there are over 14 federal grant programs that MOFGA as an organization has that are either part of a cooperative agreement with many collaborative organizations or that we hold directly. And our programs that are under threat are the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. So this is a program that, again, helps get funds directly out to producers to adapt and improve their production systems. The NRCS partnership position, so we currently partner with NRCS to help reach more producers to enroll in more of these programs. The Transition to Organic Partnership Program, the Organic Marketing Development Grant, and a Risk Management Agency grant for farm viability and resilience, and the Farmers Market Promotion Program. So we currently have funds that are frozen, that are under review for work that we've already done. So these are reimbursement funds, and any future payments are frozen on many of these programs. And the total contracted funds at risk for MOFGA is about $1.7 million. So that's obligated funds through these contracts that has not been spent yet. So that's the total amount that's at risk. And in coordination with food groups across the state, We have compiled a total of Maine nonprofit service provider contracts that are at risk. This does not include DACF or UMaine or Cooperative Extension. Just among the nonprofit service providers, there's $40 million in obligated funds that are at risk of being cut. So I'm gonna stop there. We're gonna come back to how to take action. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can hand it over to our farmers and hear directly about the impacts of what's happening on the ground with our farmers. And we're gonna start with Seth Kroeck from Crystal Spring Farm.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being on the call this morning. Really appreciate your time and willingness to kind of hear about this. It's a complex problem, and it's very much and excuse the pun, down in the weeds for farms and interfacing with bureaucracy. My name is Seth Kroeck. I run Crystal Spring Community Farm in Brunswick. We've been a certified organic farm for 21 years. We currently grow certified organic carrots, Brussels sprouts, and wild blueberries, as well as a few other bits and pieces. In the 21 years that we've been farming here, we have taken part in a lot of different USDA programs. And I want to start off by saying that as everybody knows, whether they're involved in agriculture or not, farming is a high risk, low margin way of making a living. We deal with Mother Nature. We deal with a changing climate. We try our best to hire very good labor and struggle to pay them from the revenue that we make off of produce that is hard to sell at a price that is long-term profitability. We have long-term profitability for. And so that's kind of the groundwork of why these USDA programs exist and why so many farms take part of them. The NRCS programs, the FSA programs, and the broader USDA programs are there to allow these businesses that rarely have a lot of expendable capital to make big, major improvements in how we do what we do. So on my farm in specific, I currently have around $90,000 in contracts through the NRCS. The largest of those is a $50,000 contract to spread mulch on the 70 plus acres of organic wild blueberries I have over the course of 4 years. Spreading mulch on top of those blueberries is going to help them be more drought resistant. It's going to strengthen the plants. And the idea being that over the course of the next decade, I'm going to be able to produce a crop that is much more consistent, is resistant to the hotter, drier summers that we have, and ultimately is going to produce more on that ground and improve the soil, but be able to offer an organic Maine wild blueberry to the folks that eat them in the state at a price that is consistent and affordable. And so that's really why these programs exist. It's to strengthen the farms from a business standpoint, but also strengthen them from an infrastructure standpoint. So the other funding that I have is through the Conservation Stewardship Program, and that is to install all kinds of perennial and annual beneficial plants around the farm that help us improve the interaction of the farm with the greater kind of biological ecosystem that the farm is a part of. Reduces our damage to pest and disease, and helps the farm kind of interact with the greater world. So both of these contracts that we have were signed in December of 2024. We started the process of spending money that needed to be spent to implement them. We're going to spread what will ultimately be around 200,000 yards of wood chips on the blueberries of ourselves over the course of 4 years. That requires specialized equipment. We started the process of modifying and purchasing that equipment. The CSP plantings, the biological plantings that we're going to do, ecological plantings, we started purchasing plant stock and seed stock so that we could do those plantings. And then after the inauguration, we were told very quickly that that funding was in a freeze. Since then, we've been asking questions, trying to figure out what's been going on, and talking with our congressional delegation in DC. And in all honesty, I actually even went to DC at the beginning of March. We have not been able to get any good answers. And I think it's all part of kind of a heavy-handed effort to change these systems. And what's happening is that it's really hurting farmers and it's hurting producers. Because we count on these programs to make our farms better. And in specific, we've made investments to do these programs because we've signed the contracts that the USDA would hold us to hold our end up to, and yet we're not necessarily expecting that they're going to hold up their end long term. In addition to the problems that we're having with USDA contracts, we're also very worried about the tariffs, especially in relationship to tariffs against Canada. As a wild blueberry grower, Maine is the only state in the union that has a commercial wild blueberry crop. We have, over the last couple of decades, not me specifically, but the industry as a whole has interacted with Canada quite a bit. There are processors on both sides of the border that work to clean and freeze blueberries to create a crop that is year-round. You'll see it in the grocery stores if you go looking for it. And so there's berries that move back and forth across the border. They help support processors to keep employees and equipment running at different times of the year. And so a closing in that border is going to be a huge disruption to the wild blueberry farmers and processors, which for the last 5 to 10 years have not really been doing very well. And so it's potentially going to have a gigantic impact on the number of blueberry farms that can keep going and the price that we're all paying to have our blueberries cleaned and frozen if we're using those processors. And so it is a major, major impact. Um, you know, in addition to that, I've heard from several growers who are very actively watching this process that don't currently have contracts. And they're very, very wary about getting involved in any of these programs going forward. Because the nature of these programs, they're really not grants, they're cost shares. They require the farms to make a plan on whatever project that's going to be happening on their farm, do the work, and after the work is done, they're then reimbursed. And so it's a huge risk for farms if there's an idea that they're going to enter this contract process with the USDA, do all the work, spend all the time, spend money on equipment and labor and fuel, and then realize on the other side of it, they're not going to be reimbursed for it. The nature of the project of these programs in the first place is that they're there to allow farms to do this work and make these improvements and give some financial support that the farmers rely on to do it. And so it's a double kick in the teeth to do a project that you couldn't afford to do and then get to the end of it and realize that you're not going to get paid. There's several farmers in the state right now who have REAP projects that have built solar arrays. Those solar arrays are up, they're running, and yet they can't get paid the $10, $20, $30, $40,000 that the government said that they were going to pay them to help with that project. Let's see. I had one other thought, but it's left me right now. Annie, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Seth. Yeah, I will echo what Seth has said for the most part. I also to introduce myself. My name is Annie Watson. I am a certified organic dairy farmer from Whitefield. I farm with my husband and our 3 young sons, who are 10, 8, and 4. So it's a very busy life that we lead. I serve on the board of MOFGA. I have for, I think, the last 10 years or so. And I also serve as president of the Maine Dairy Industry Association, which is the trade organization that represents all of our dairy farms in Maine. So I have a pretty broad view of the industry and the impacts that we are sort of dealing with right now. Because of these federal changes, But like I said, I'd like to echo what Seth has said about especially the NRCS programs, the EQIP program. I purchased my farm in 2013. I'm a first generation dairy farmer. We purchased it from a retiring dairy farmer. And he didn't have a next generation who wanted to take over. So when we purchased it, we purchased a lot of antiquated infrastructure. We were milking 55 cows in a tie stall, which is very labor intensive. And they were spending the entire winter in the tie stall. So utilizing NRCS programs over the last 10 years, we have gone into cost share agreements. We've built 2 bedded pack barns, manure pit. All of that would not have been possible without these NRCS programs, especially EQIP. As many of you may or may not know, a byproduct of our dairy farms is manure. There is a lot of manure to manage. And the EQIP program is really the program that helps support our farms in managing that manure and making sure we're able to store it, making sure that it is kept out of our waterways, that the ways that we're utilizing the manure is appropriate and is, we go through many processes, including a nutrient management plan, which we get all of our soils tested. We have an organization come out and help us build a plan around what we're going to be doing with all the manure and how we're going to best utilize the manure that our cows make. We milk 70 cows. We have about 160 total, including our young stock. And manure is something we deal with every single day. And just to write a nutrient management plan to plan where all that manure is going to go, that costs upwards of $8,000 to $10,000. There's no way our farm could feasibly pay for that on our own. And without the support of the NRCS programs, we wouldn't be able to do it. So it's, these programs are so important to our farms for our sustainability, for our environmental protection. They just help our communities, they help our waterways stay clean. It's so important. It's such a big part of what we do. And, to have this sort of concern about whether or not the funding is going to continue is alarming to so many. Dairy farming especially is a incredibly capital intensive business. We need all the infrastructure we have to build. It costs a tremendous amount of money. And these programs help farmers do that to the best of their ability with the cost share, as Seth has said. So we are, oddly enough, I just had my NRCS agent here last week with another contract to do some stream crossings across the road on some land we just purchased. And while it's the exciting prospect, it's very exciting to think about doing another NRCS project, EQIP program, to help support our waterways. We're right on the Sheepscot River. It's incredibly important that water is protected. It's also a very daunting thought to think that if we go through all of these processes and at the end of it are not able to recoup any of the costs, it could absolutely tank our business. That's, a hard gamble for folks to make. And so we're asking farmers to potentially sacrifice the protection of their environment and the ecosystem within which their farm works against the realities of their farm business. And that's what I think, especially as organic farmers, we really try to work within a holistic system. Everything it's all a part of a larger cycle. And we're so dependent on every tiny piece of it that any sort of disruption in this way, especially in the financial disruption like that, could be detrimental. So we're honestly considering whether or not we're going to sign the contract. It's, goes back to sort of this idea of like all the climate smart partnerships that have also been put to the wayside. It's disappointing because, as I said, as organic farmers, these programs were helping us to continue to do the good work that we do as farmers, as organic farmers. But what I saw was that these were programs, climate smart partnerships for adapting, different processes. These were programs that conventional farmers were also going to be able to take advantage of and maybe change some of the systems in which they work on their farms to become more climate resistant and beneficial to the greater environment. So I really see that as such a huge loss because there was a whole sector in which that we really could have had some positive impact for the health of our planet. And that seems to have just gone away in the blink of an eye. So there's a lot of trepidation over, like I said, all of the climate smart. You know, on our farm, we're looking to, which I believe the program's still going forward, but so many of the NRCS practices, the way they test the practices is by using farms and having farms do the groundwork. And so we are, you know, enrolled to do a biochar trial to see, you know, a controlled spreading of biochar along with spreading of not biochar to see what the long-term impacts of using that process, what that does to our soil, what that does for the carbon in the soil. And it's, you know, these are practices that rely on farmers to test them and to prove them. And so it's part of such a bigger system that is the fact that it's at risk is really alarming, because our farmers are at the forefront of all of this. And unfortunately, it seems like all of the responsibility also falls back on farmers' shoulders as well. I know I've heard from a lot of farmers, the local food purchasing programs being disrupted and canceled. That's going to have an impact on so many farms, including dairy farmers who process their own products at their farms. So much of you know, folks' business plans hinge upon being able to sell into local markets. And you know, formerly there was hoping to be an increase in this sort of local food purchasing. And so that is not only alarming for our, you know, food insecure folks, but also to the farmers who rely on that stream to sell their products. Tariffs are sort of the biggest worry for our farmers right now in terms of fertilizer costs. Maine, we import a tremendous amount of fertilizer from Canada. The challenge with fertilizer in particular is that Canadian companies mix the fertilizers, but they buy a tremendous amount of their ingredients from the United States. So those ingredients are going to be tariffed on the way out, mixed in Canada, and then tariffed on the way in. So the impacts to producers in terms of what the end of the day cost is going to be it's really hard to say whether it's going to be a 25% tariff or a 50% tariff. If you're purchasing $100,000 worth of fertilizer, that's, you know, there's a big difference between $100,000 and $150,000. So we're talking about major costs. For organic dairy producers, our biggest worry is the increase in the cost of organic grain. At this point, all of the organic grain that is fed to organic dairy cows in the state is imported from Canada. We are anticipating between an $80 and $100 increase per ton. That's just what our grain company's been able to sort of scratch on the back of an envelope to give us a sense of what that increase would be. For a farm like mine, we milk 70 cows, as I said, that we're talking about an increase of $1,200 to $1,400 a month, given that we add other ingredients. So our grain ration is a little bit more complex. That is a really difficult number to try to think about increasing, because we don't have any control over our price. The organic dairy market has been a funky one, to say the least, but our pricing has been below our cost of production for a number of years now. So our organic dairy farms are going to be put in a very precarious situation when we've already been dealing with incredibly high grain prices, and we're dealing with all of the inflationary costs that everyone has been dealing with as well over the last several years. But our organic dairy farmers are just now finally starting to see a slight increase in our pricing from our cooperatives and from our the processors that purchase our product. However, that's all going to be eaten up by the increase in the grain cost. So it's something that we're really paying attention to on our farm. I know every farm. Organic dairying and dairying in general is a 3-year cycle. So any changes or decisions you make today, even if you decide to back off on how much grain you're feeding, that has an impact on not only the cow's milk production, it has an impact on their reproduction, it has an impact on the health and their well-being. And that cycle is really hard to get out of once you're in it. As I said, it's a 3-year cycle in terms of calving and with the reproduction. So these are, impacts that we can't just turn around within a month and sort of change how we purchase or how we produce. And so the impacts to our organic dairy farming community is potentially going to be very detrimental if something doesn't shift, or if there isn't sort of a way out of this. We've been talking with our congressional offices as well. They're all very up to date. They all appreciate hearing, stories of farms, stories of community members. But a lot of times we're preaching to the choir. We have a delegation that understands the importance of agriculture in our state, and so it's trying to make the folks maybe who do not have as much of an understanding in other places in other states. Those are the ones that we really need to sort of get on board with, understanding how important these programs are to our farms, how important these farms are to our food security, and to ensure that we are able to keep, producing the food that we as farmers make and produce to feed our neighbors. And that, at the end of the day, is the most important thing that we do as farmers. So thank you all for taking the time today. And I think we're going to have questions. Sarah, is that?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Annie. And thank you, Seth. We have time for questions, so I encourage folks to put those in the chat. I'm also just going to share my screen briefly again to share a few action items while you're getting your questions in the chat. So a few things that have been mentioned, but just want to reiterate. So folks can and should contact your member of Congress. Many of you on the call today might be from Maine, but maybe there are others who are outside of Maine, or you have friends or family that are outside of Maine. And as Annie was just saying, we really appreciate everything that the Maine congressional delegation has been doing. They've been very responsive to farmers' needs, and we need to keep telling these stories, keep the pressure on, because there are a lot of things that are happening right now. And so we need to make sure that the impacts to farmers and our food system continue to stay at the top and remain a priority. So Jennifer is going to put the links in the chats to some action pages where you can just contact your member of Congress directly through an action form that we have. We make it really easy. But you can also call your member of Congress. Calls are really impactful. And a couple of things that you can mention on that call is that we want to honor farmer contracts. We want to make sure that any contract a farmer has is honored. We want to keep congressionally appropriated IRA programs. We want to keep these funded, as we saw the impact that can have in the state of Maine. And that is just for, the one program that we talked about today is $13 million or more that could be going to producers in Maine right now that is on hold. And we want to keep organic and climate programs. So in particular, these programs may be targeted because it has the word climate in it. And as we heard from Annie and Seth, they do so much more for everything related to farm viability and production and environmental security. So we want to make sure that these programs will remain and will be prioritized. They are critical for the future of the health of our ecosystems and farms. We are also starting to organize around actions during the congressional recess. So folks can mark their calendar for April 16th, Farmer Day of Action. More details will be coming for that. And if you would like to join a planning committee for that, you can reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat before we wrap up here. And then maybe most importantly and ongoing is to support our farmers. So many of our farmers do sell direct to consumers, but for our farmers who aren't selling direct to consumers, we also know which brands and processors, are supporting our farmers. So go to your farmers market, sign up for a CSA, support your local co-ops, go to Hannaford and Shaw's and request that they support more organic farmers by carrying more organic products, more local products. and support Organic Valley and Stonyfield, who are the big organic processors that actually do source from our farmers here in Maine. There's a lot of ways to support our farmers, and utilizing your purchase dollars to support them directly whenever possible is really critical for making sure that we can have a viable farm economy here in Maine. So we are going to move over to questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everybody here and I can see the questions. And we are just going to talk through them, what we have here. So let me scroll down to see what our questions are. So there was a question earlier about the status of the SARE funding, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and MOFGA does partner on quite a few SARE grants for research, and we have one currently ourselves and have had many of those in the past. And I think they are not frozen at the moment, although some of the statuses of those is uncertain. I think that's one of the programs that we're still waiting to hear more information about, in addition to some of the other organic and climate smart programs that I mentioned. So the Climate Smart Commodities program is currently frozen. The Transition to Organic Partnership program is in an ambiguous status. We're not sure if it's frozen or not, or if that's moving forward. The Organic Marketing Development Grant is frozen. And SARE, depending on the comfort level of the lead applicant, they may or may not be incurring new project funds, but we have not heard that program is canceled or frozen at the moment, that those projects can continue. But some partners, similar to what we've heard Seth and Annie say, may not feel comfortable incurring costs with the uncertainty that is happening in this moment. There was also a question about RFSI, and that's the Regional Food System Infrastructure or Investment. This is where the acronyms start to get a little difficult, because it's hard to remember what every single letter means. But that is a regional initiative that is investing in food systems. The state of Maine has a cooperative agreement on that, I believe. Maybe some other groups do as well. And I believe there may be somebody from Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry on the call today. So feel free to put something in the chat if I've gotten that wrong. But the last I heard, that program was also frozen currently and was not moving forward. The other questions in the chat: is there any ongoing litigation going on against USDA that might help, and any current bills pending before the state that might be helpful and need support now? So yes, there is definitely litigation against USDA happening on multiple fronts, and this is just what we've been able to track. There have been lawsuits against the REAP payments that were frozen. There actually was a federal administrative ruling that the USDA staff cuts and the firings were illegal, and that all of the staff had to be reinstated at least for 45 days. But it's not clear if that has actually happened. And Seth and Annie, it might be interesting to hear more from you if you've seen any impacts here in the state with some of the staffing cuts. But there are definitely lawsuits against USDA, both for frozen payments and for staffing cuts. And I'm also going to ask, I think Bill Pluker from our policy team is on the call today, and ask him to put any state bills into the chat that could be helpful in this moment that folks should look into. But Seth and Annie, on the staffing cuts, what are some of the impacts that you've seen there?
I could just quickly state that 4 engineers that were hired through NRCS have been let go, which leaves, I believe, 6 across the entire state. And those 4 that were let go have already been picked up by, organizations in the private sector. So it's integral that we maintain our agricultural engineers for NRCS projects, especially because they're like I've talked about with our programs, that we've been a part of with Equip, they're huge. They're, you know, constructing bridges for cows to walk across, you know, waterways, and it's integral to the work that we do. And so I know that has been a major issue. I also know that there are some offices that don't have any staff right now actually working in their offices, and that is they're, you know, they're the connection between our farm community and all of these programs. And I mean, I'm sure, Seth, you feel it this way, that if you get a good NRCS agent who can walk you through the programs and how to sign up for them, I mean, you're so lucky. And that's all of our NRCS agents in the state. So to lose any is really not a great thing at all.
Yeah, 100%. I have the same experience. So there were 6 employees in the office that I work with in NRCS. They're down to 1, and that's the director. And so, you know, I think the heartbreaking thing about this, and you know, this is all going to hurt farms. You know, right now we're talking about the next year or 2 contracts that we have. But I think the heartbreaking thing from the staffing standpoint is that the whole next generation that's going to take over these service agencies is now gone. These are people that were in their 20s, that a lot of them have advanced degrees, and they have committed themselves to work with the government in service of farmers, and they've now been fired. And so, you know, a lot of them have left. Those of them that haven't, who would be hired, who would take their job back knowing that they could be refired in 45 days or in another round of firing that's rumored to be happening September. And so the destabilization of the whole system that helps farmers is what's going to really have a really, really generational impact here. And if we don't really push back strong and hard right now, I don't really know what it's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and definitely very disappointing what is happening with the staffing cuts. And yes, these things will have a longer term impact. I mean, all of these programs that are being cut will have a longer term impact, because as we've also heard, farms are planning on multi-year cycles, right? This is not just this year for any of this, that these have implications beyond this growing season. So Ryan from our team, our programs director, has shared a little more information in the chat about Northeast SARES. Any new applications have been paused for graduate students and state programs. So thank you, Ryan, for sharing that. And then Ross asked about the PASA, which is the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, one of MOFGA's partners, and they are the lead on the Regional Partnership for Climate Smart Commodity grant that MOFGA is a part of, along with many other organizations throughout the Northeast. And PASA has joined a lawsuit against the funding freezes and pauses. And so MOFGA is not officially a plaintiff on that lawsuit, because you have to be the lead organization on a grant. So that PASA, we're kind of nested under their umbrella on that Climate Smart Commodities program, but we are very much looking at PASA's lawsuit, and very thankful that they're taking action. We're in contact with them regularly about what's going on, as well as many of our other partners through the National Organic Coalition. And I also just want to really give a shout out to the robust community here in Maine of food service providers, farm service providers, and nonprofits and agencies that are working to support our food and farm system here. I think maybe it might be Jimmy from the Maine Federation of Farmers Markets, or somebody else who's on the call today, but also put in the chat, and just to call everybody's attention to it in case you didn't see it, that right now is also a critical time to be advocating to keep SNAP funding. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And that we also participate in partnership with the Maine Federation of Farmers Markets, who really leads the effort on the Double Up Bucks program. So the Maine Harvest Bucks program, where SNAP recipients can use their SNAP dollars to double those and spend more money with farmers at farmers markets on CSA shares and on local food. So though there are many ripple effects and impacts related to SNAP benefits. I mean, first and foremost, we want people to have the food that they need to be healthy and to thrive. That is critical. Food is a human right, and everybody should have dignified access to the food that they need to be healthy. And we want to make sure that, again, that we can really make sure that the local wonderful, fruits and vegetables and other things that our farmers are producing are accessible to all consumers, regardless of what they're using to purchase that food. So take a look in the chat to find the information there on helping to advocate for SNAP. And for our Maine Federation of Farmers Markets friends, thanks for what you're doing, and feel free to put any other links in the chat that would be helpful. Let me scroll back down here to get to the bottom of the chat. So we have a question from Sarah, a small poultry farmer, about avian flu. And Sarah, I'm going to see if maybe one of our staff can follow up with you directly if you have specific questions about the practices or concerns about what is going, how you should be approaching things on your farm. So you can get some direct guidance on that. But yes, avian flu is a national issue. We do know that avian flu is in wild birds here in Maine, and that it's something that the USDA is and should be tackling in terms of a federal approach. But I can't speak to exactly what the USDA, I think there's been a lot of conflicting guidance, again, even around an emergency situation like avian flu, how the USDA is approaching that under this administration. So Sarah, if you put your email in the chat or directly contact Ryan from our team who's on the call today, we can connect you up with resources directly for that. Bill has shared a few important bills to be watching for the state are the agricultural bonds that are coming from the president of the Senate and the governor, which would send up to $55 million back to agricultural infrastructure in Maine. So thanks for sharing that, Bill. And LD 415 will double the size of the Mainers Feeding Mainers program, which buys local produce from Maine farms and will be critical and has been critical in that food safety net, and making sure that we're making connections again with the healthy local produce that our farmers are producing and getting that to consumers in the food security system. So please, definitely, I think we might also have a couple of state representatives on the call today. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. And we encourage you to support those efforts. And Ryan put some resources in the chat for avian flu. I'm just scrolling through the rest of the comments here. Some more information about LD 468 that would work on more local fruits and vegetables for SNAP folks. And that's to double the state support for that Double Up Bucks program. And more information from Maine Federation of Farmers Markets. So again, everybody take a look in the chat. A lot of great resources and links are going in there. And oh, we're hearing maybe from somebody at DASF that it's unclear, but maybe RFSI is unfrozen. So we will wait to hear more. And that might be an interesting note to end on. We're at the 1 o'clock time here. I think, overall, we know how critical these programs are for our farms, for our food system, and the unnecessary chaos that all of these programs have been thrown into. Even this last comment about, is it frozen? Is it unfrozen? Is it moving forward? Is it not moving forward? All of this is completely unnecessary and comes at a time when farmers are making plans for this season and beyond, or have already made plans for this season or beyond. And on top of loss of funding and loss of these programs, this is adding an incredible amount of stress to our farming community in what is already a very difficult and challenging area of work. And we are so grateful for all that our farmers do every day. And we really encourage everybody, again, to take action, support our farmers, make sure that these programs can keep going, go support our farmers directly. And thank you all for all you do. Thank you to Annie and Seth for being on the call with us today. We really appreciate all that you're doing and taking the time out of your busy day to be here with us all. And please reach out. You can find more information at MOFGA.org to support MOFGA, become a member of MOFGA, or take action on any of these programs. So thank you all so much for taking time with us today, and we will look forward to being in touch. Have a great day, everybody.